파친코 이민진 작가 북토크에 오신 여러분 모두 환영합니다. 저는 오늘 진행을 맡은 제니퍼 클라이드입니다. 반갑습니다. 감사합니다. 소설 파친코의 새 출간을 기념해 인플루엔셜이 주최하는 이민진 작가 북토크의 문을 열어보겠습니다. 소중한 저녁 시간 이렇게 이 자리를 가득 채워주신 모든 분들을 보니까요, 파친코와 또 이민진 작가를 향한 여러분의 관심, 뜨거운 관심과 또 열기가 느껴지는 것 같습니다. 진행에 앞서 먼저 오늘 프로그램을 간단히 안내해드리겠습니다. 북토크 참여 신청 시 남겨주신 질문들 중에요, 많은 분들이 공통적으로 궁금해하신 부분들을 제가 대표해서 작가님과 이야기 나누는 대담 시간과 또 이곳 현장에 참석하신 여러분께서 직접 질문하는 Q&A 시간을 가져보도록 하겠습니다. 작가님이 한국의 독자들과 이렇게 가까이 마주하는 자리가 첫 만남인 만큼 독자분들의 이야기를 최대한 많이 듣고 싶다라고 했습니다. 그러니까 여러분의 많은 참여 부탁드립니다. 그리고 아울러 북토크 진행 중 영어의 동시 통역 그리고 한국어 자막이 이 뒤쪽 스크린에 송출될 예정입니다. 참고 부탁드립니다. 행사장 내에서는 아까 말씀드린 것처럼 반드시 마스크를 착용해 주시고 비상시 대피 동선과 또 비상구 위치는 화면으로 확인해 주시기 바랍니다. 자, 그럼 파친코 이민진 작가 북토크 본격적으로 시작해 보겠습니다. 소설 파친코는 세계 33개국에 번역 수출되었고 뉴욕 타임스, BBC, 아마존 등 75개 이상의 주요 매체의 올해의 책 그리고 전미도서상 최종 후보에 선정되며 평단과 또 대중을 모두 사로잡았습니다. 지난 7월 새로운 번역으로 재출간되어 예약 판매 시작과 동시에 일일 판매 1위를 기록하는 등 아주 뜨거운 반응이 계속되고 있습니다. 자, 그럼 오래 기다리셨습니다. 그 화제의 주인공 파친코의 이민진 작가님을 만나보도록 할까요? It is a great pleasure to introduce the esteemed author of Pachinko, Min-jin Lee. 큰 박수로 환영해 주시기 바랍니다. You can take the center stage. It is a very special place for all of us, and we want to thank you, first of all, for being here with us today. I'm excited for today's conversation. Before we get started, would you like to greet the audience, say hello to them?
Well, first of all, thank you, Jennifer, for joining me. Thank you so much for coming out today. I want to recognize something very important. In order for these events to take place, so many people have to work so hard for so long to make it invisible and seamless and perfect. And I want to recognize every one of them. And I can't because it would take all day. However, I really want to thank TJ, who is my partner, in producing an accurate story of a very important book for me. So he's here, and he's the CEO. I also want to thank Ji-in. I want to thank Sunju. I want to thank Jae-sung. I want to thank Kim-san. There's so many people who have worked so hard in order for this to be successful. My family is also here. My parents are here all the way from America. And my older sister is here. And it's important because when I was a little girl, I used to get picked on a lot, and she used to protect me. So if anybody picks on me today, I want you to know that I have backup. And my husband is also here too. But above all, beyond the things that I should say, I think the most important thing that I've been thinking about all day is that 9 people have passed away in the past 48 hours. 7 people are missing from the floods. And I hope with all my heart that they will be consoled and they will be discovered. And I want to thank each and every one of you for risking the rain to come out and see me, because it means so much to me. So thank you.
Thank you very much. On my way here, I was actually thinking, oh, thank goodness it's not raining hard, because I really was worried. And I'm glad that the weather isn't as bad. It's muggy, and I'm glad that everyone was able to make it here safe, and I'm looking forward to our talk today.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Okay, shall we take our seats?
Sure.
All right.
My skirt is shorter than I thought.
That's why we're pants. Okay, so we are here today to speak with you about, of course, your novel, Pachinko. And actually, we received a boatload of questions, so many questions, and it was very difficult to choose which ones to ask. So we have chosen, I guess, the most commonly asked questions to cover first, and then we're going to move on and do the Q&A session. So these questions were very carefully chosen. My first question, I'd like to begin with how you have visited Korea multiple times, and this is your first to actually meet with your Korean readers, and you're mainly here to celebrate the publication of the newly translated version of Pachinko. And as you can see, do you have an idea of how many people are with us today in the audience?
I was told that it's 2,000.
Yeah, that's what I was told too. Of course, we haven't counted. But here with us, yes, are more than 2,000 of your fans. How does this make you feel?
I feel really humbled by this, because I wrote this book, and I wrote another book without having a contract, without having an agent, and it never occurred to me that this would be possible. Very few authors ever get the opportunity to not just even have one publication in Korea, but then to have 2 publications and to be able to control the accuracy. It's an extraordinary honor.
And you did say that your family's here with you today.
Right.
안녕하세요. 반갑습니다. Welcome.
And my cousins are here, and
Your
the actor
cousins are here too.
and my famous cousin Kim Hae-eun is here.
네, 안녕하세요. 반갑습니다. Yes, thank you so much for coming. So how does it feel for you to have your family here with you?
Oh, I mean, it's every kid's dream, right? Especially because when I was growing up, I wasn't like a very good student, and I was deeply unremarkable. I was very unremarkable as a young person. So at the age of 53, or I guess in Korea I'm 54, finally something has happened. So I'm glad. Thank you for showing up today, because if you didn't come, it would have been, I think the expression in Korean is 쪽팔려.
망했다.
감사합니다.
So you are obviously on a very, very tight schedule with very little time between appointments and events associated with the republishing of Pachinko. You'll be receiving the Manhae Grand Prize for Literature. That's on Friday, the day after tomorrow. So congratulations in
Thank you.
advance. But despite your crazy, hectic schedule, you always seem to be just charged with energy. I'd like to ask about maybe some of your favorite past events in Korea and the ones that you're, I guess, most looking forward to that's on your agenda.
Well, I've done several events in Korea which were very, very poorly attended. So I did one event, I guess, in 2008. And it was a conversation about Virginia Woolf, and I was really excited to talk about feminism, but nobody wanted to listen. But it was really important because I met a wonderful person at that conversation who still is a dear friend of mine. As for future events, I think I'm going to have bingsu tomorrow.
You have not had bingsu so far?
No, because I have been working nonstop, but tomorrow, no matter what, I am getting bingsu.
It'll be your first bingsu in Korea, right? Of course.
In a long time.
Okay, what's your favorite type of bingsu?
Oh, it's pat bingsu, and also I like nokcha bingsu. Yeah,
Nokcha bingsu with the bean?
with duck and ice cream.
Yeah. Oh, no pat?
Of course, pot. Yes. Oh, no,
okay.
that's
All right.
that's obvious. Yeah.
Okay, well, since we don't have much time, let's rush to the first question, which is a very simple question, but one of the most asked questions, which happens to be, what does the book Pachinko mean to you?
Well, the title Pachinko is an allegory of what I think what life is like. I think that life is unfair. However, it's very important, in light of that knowledge, to still play this game of life. Ideally, we play it with morality and goodness and with kind intentions. However, it's very important to play.
Wow. Shayna had a very brief introduction, and she said that she would try to keep it very short. And you are keeping your answers very brief today. All right, well, Pachinko is the first English language novel to depict the lives of Zainichi. I had not known about Zainichi before. Zainichi, it literally translates residing in Korea? Mm-hmm. Okay, residing in Japan, excuse me. So it provided an opportunity for people to look into the lives of Zainichi women in particular. I heard that you did research after research, and you interviewed so many people, not only in Korea and Japan and places all around the world. Could you maybe tell us about the interviews and the types of research that you did?
So, part of what my work is to create a beautiful lie.
A lie.
A lie. So, a fiction, by definition, is a story, and it's not true. And yet, in order to have you participate in my lie, I have to tell the truth emotionally. And because I write social realistic novels, they must be accurate in terms of what happened. Mm-hmm. This is a historical novel. It's not a history book. So in order for me to do that, I needed to meet as many people as possible, because the version that I wrote initially, based on only book research, was incredibly boring. So I had to throw that away because I wouldn't waste your time. And when I started again, I met many, many Korean Japanese people. And when I met them, I thought, they're so interesting and powerful and funny and heartbreaking. And I thought, oh, I didn't tell the right story, because I was so motivated by my ego to be smart and to be political. But being smart and being political is not an interesting experience of reading a novel. So I had to throw out that book and start again. And based upon my research, I had to put back in the feelings and the humanity of the experiences of the character. And that's what happened.
But what is it like to throw away something you've worked on so hard and for so long? I mean, how was it for you?
You know, it's literally a throwing away, but I have a kind of, I guess it's a very positive interpretation, which is nothing is wasted. I think every single moment in my life is not wasted. It may feel like it's wasted at the time, and it is discouraging. However, I am who I am today because I messed up so many times before. So for example, I failed the driving test twice. I still don't have a license.
You still don't?
No. I failed the bar exam when I was a lawyer. Why do I talk about it? Because I think that it's such a taboo to talk about the things that are setbacks. But in reality, if I hadn't failed the driving test, if I hadn't failed my bar exam the first time, I really wouldn't be who I am today.
Mm-hmm. Do you consider yourself an optimist? Because you seem to take failure, pretty casually, pretty easily, and it's no big deal. I failed, okay, I can try next time, or maybe it's not for me.
I think in some ways I'm an optimist, and in some ways I guess I could be a pessimist. But I think what I really believe is that I think life has meaning. So because I think life has meaning, every event, every moment has meaning. So here I am right now with Jennifer in front of over 2,000 people at Sejong University at Taeyang Hall. Why are we here?
Mm-hmm.
I have to believe that there's a reason why we're here.
That's what I believe too. There's always a reason. There's always a reason. Let's get back to the book. Now, Pachinko is a diasporic novel. I didn't know this word before. I mean, okay, anyhow. And it's also about love, right? It's also about love and the relationship between family members even. And you speak a lot about love and freedom. And another question that many of our audiences here have asked is, what does love and freedom mean to you?
So to go back to diaspora, it's a Greek word. It's a word that comes from the Bible, and it's really important because it was originally meant for the Jews from the Old Testament. And the reason why that's important is that the Jews experienced a kind of expulsion from their homeland. And that is something that really spoke to me as a Korean person. And also, whether you're Korean or whether you're Chinese or whether you are French, diaspora is a social condition now of the 21st century of the highest order. We now even have environmental diasporic people. You can't live in a certain area because now the climate is too hot. And it's something that I think about a great deal. If you have to leave your country or your home because of the environment, or because of war, or because of oppression, or because of lack of economic opportunity, or imperialism, I wonder what happens to you, to your family structure. And that sounds really sad, and it is really sad. However, how do you change the world where you end up? And to me, that's really interesting because not only am I changed because I left Korea, but did I change America where I ended up? Is that even a possibility? Now, when I was 7, I didn't think that when I left in 1976. Mm-hmm. But the more I meet people, I realize where we are, where we came from, and how we affect each other. Mm-hmm. It's really quite powerful. As for love and freedom, they're so deeply connected because if you really want to love, it will liberate the person who loves, and it can also liberate the person who is loved. Mm-hmm. Without love, I don't think it's possible to ever be liberated to become the person you are meant to be. And in this sense, this goes back to my philosophy. I believe that our lives have meaning. I believe that each of us are meant to be loved.
Mm-hmm. You just spoke about having left Korea when you were just 7 years old. And many wondered about your childhood in Korea. I mean, you must have memories, right? So what kinds of memories do you have of your childhood in Korea? What do you remember the most? And how was your childhood in Korea?
Well, we were very ordinary middle-class people in Korea. I grew up in Seogyeodong, and my father was a marketing executive for a cosmetics company that doesn't exist anymore. He worked for a company called Pieris. And my mother was a piano teacher. She studied music at Yonsei, and she had neighborhood children who were her students. And when I think about my childhood home, I always think of my sisters and me. I'm the 둘째 of 3 girls. I remember things like Christmas parties that my younger sister and I were not allowed to attend, that my mother had for her students. I'm still upset about it.
Oh, okay. How many years apart are you, your sisters?
My older sister's 2.5 years older, and my younger sister's 2.5 years older, and my younger sister's not here right now, so we can tease her.
Oh, okay. And you were not allowed? You were not invited to the party?
Oh, because the parties were only for piano students.
Oh, that's why.
But my younger sister and I were too young, so we had to go to Kunama's house. I'm still mad about this.
Mom let it happen, right?
And they had ice cream. So it's a theme. I really like ice cream.
Well, it's a good thing they didn't have pup bingsu, right?
Right.
All right, and also, now back to pachinko again. Now, what stories are to follow pachinko? And we'd like to know about the details of the characters that weren't expressed or shown through the novel. So could you tell us a bit about that?
So I'm working on my next book called American Hagwon, and that'll complete the diaspora trilogy called The Koreans. The Koreans did not ask me to write this book. I decided to write it. So I hope you'll like it, but if you don't tell me. As for the characters as I intended it to be in Pachinko, if I did not talk about a certain plot line, it was very intentional. I want you to know that because I spent almost 30 years thinking, researching, and writing and rewriting this book, every word was really hard won. Every character was really hard won. I have often been asked if I will write a sequel.
Yes.
It will never happen.
Oh, that's one of our questions.
It will never happen. And I don't want it to happen because you own those characters now. Once you read the book, reading is such a powerful thing because when you read, what you imagine is only so much greater than what I imagined. Because in your mind, you have your own Sanja and you have your own Hansu. You have your own Kim Chang-ho and you can see it in your own mind. And in many ways, your imagination is so much more vivid and technicolor than I could ever portray in words. And I want you to have that experience.
I think we often, as a student, I remember our teachers telling us, whether it's a song or a book, you are the one to interpret it. It can mean this to you, it could mean a whole different story to someone else. So I think I understand. But, yeah, if only there were to be a sequel to it, right? So what is a message that you truly hope to convey through, like the most powerful message, perhaps, that you want to convey through Pachinko?
I think the thing that's really important to me is really expressed in the first line. History has failed us, but no matter. I want to encourage each person in this room and anybody who reads the book to realize that ordinary people persist and can be defiant in the face of oppression, in the face of inequality, and in the face of discouragement. So there are many, many things in the world that are so unfair, and every person has a heartbreak every day, and yet, no matter, I want you to persist because I think that the struggle of life is actually quite beautiful.
How do you struggle with your difficulties, or how do you cope with stress?
I think what really helps me in my darkest moments is to believe that there is meaning in what I experience. Even if I don't understand the meaning in that moment, that perhaps one day I will see that interpretation in a more clear way. It's also very possible that we could die not knowing why something happened. And yet, I believe that there is meaning. Like, I don't know why 9 people passed away in the past 48 hours, that 7 people are missing, and every single person who loves those 16 individuals must be in despair right at this moment. So that can be happening exactly at the time right now where I could feel joy at being with you. I find the human condition to be absolutely mystifying.
Yeah, it gets us thinking a lot. Another question about this is about you, actually. We've received a lot of questions about you. We'll get to the book. We'll get to more of the questions about the book later. But obviously, not only has your novel Pachinko gained, rave reviews and interest, but you obviously are in the spotlight as well, and you are receiving so much love and attention. How does it feel for you to be receiving so much love and attention from your fans in Korea, from your Korean audience, your Korean readers? And there was something I read in an interview that you said that as a child, a teenager, you avoided anything that brought attention to you. You were an introvert, and you still say you're an introvert, which is hard to believe. So could you tell us a bit about that as well?
So I didn't really start speaking in public until almost middle school. I had great difficulty as a child speaking and also interacting with my peers. Even now, if you put me in front of children, I'm amazing. If you put me in front of animals, I am like A+. But when you put me in front of other adults, I still feel a sense of awkwardness. And I think that I am absolutely an introvert. So right now, the fact that I could get here on stage and speak in front of all of you nice folks who came out is an act of education and practice. I have taken so many classes on public speaking. And if I could, I would just stay home and read.
That's what you do all the time, read and write. That brings us to the next question, which is, because you obviously spend so much time reading, it's what you really enjoy doing.
I'm really good at reading.
You're good at reading. We're often very good at what we like to do, right? And you just write and write endlessly. What do you do for fun? I mean, how do you unwind?
Oh,
You even go on vacations.
You know, I realize I failed because I didn't answer the stress question. So stress and unwinding, not so good at that. I do exercise a little bit. Like today I went to the gym because I was really scared for today. And I'm not a very athletic person, but what I really like is to walk. So I got on the treadmill and I did about an hour very, very slowly. But I think that because I don't really like to move around too much, if I go to the gym or even walk like a mile, that's a victory.
Do you often think a lot about writing when you're actually walking on that treadmill? What are you thinking when you're exercising? Have you thought about it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think about all the things that really trouble me. I mean, I said this the other day because somebody asked me about this. I really want to be pleasant. I do. However, I'm always upset.
You are amazingly pleasant to be with.
I want to be really pleasant because one of the things that I learned in my public speaking classes, and that's the reason why I'm able to be here talking, is that if I forget myself 100% and only focus on the person that I'm with or the people that are in front of me and forget my own needs, then it's very possible to not be nervous. So, and the most important thing to be in front of other people is how can I be useful? So if I say anything today, I want it to be useful. So if there's anybody here who suffers from public speaking, try to forget yourself and only think about the needs of the person that you're with.
All right. 네. 네, 감사합니다. Thank you. What is life like as a writer? What is your day-to-day life like?
I wear sweatpants. I don't normally look like this. Well, I think what's so interesting is in the culture, we glamorize the lives of writers. But the reality is that most writers around the world have a very, very difficult life. I serve as a trustee for PEN America and also as a director for the Authors Guild, two of the most powerful writers' organizations in the United States. And the reason why I serve on these organizations is because I believe that the freedom of expression is so central to our human condition. And writing is a very powerful tool which lasts beyond the spoken word. So that's really important. And then secondly, the average writer in America lives below the poverty line. And therefore, I will always be on the side of writers because writing is always an act of risk. It is a dangerous act. Many parts of the world, writers are persecuted, imprisoned for just the act of writing and thinking their own individual thoughts. This country, as you know, has had a long history of censorship, even as it's becoming a young democracy. And especially for that reason, it is so important to remember all those who have been persecuted for fighting colonialism as well as oppression. And as a writer, I'm very proud to be a part of that tribe.
Now, in multiple interviews, you expressed your concerns about discrimination. Discrimination against the weak. You also speak a lot about hatred that people have towards each other, anger, you even mentioned. And I mean, not only hatred in Korea, but I mean, just people that have this anger and hatred towards other people around the world. So as a writer, as an Asian woman, as an Asian American, an immigrant, what message do you want to convey when it comes to, I guess, hatred or anger? Should we control it? Should we struggle with it? Should we just block it out? I mean, how should we deal with this?
I think that the temptation to say that it's not happening, the temptation to say that hatred, inequality, oppression are not happening, or that we should put it aside, is very, very strong, especially for motivated individuals. I imagine, and I'm a parent, that if my child is experiencing inequity, it's easier to say, just forget it, ignore it, and keep going on. But it's really important, if your child says to you, something as bad is happening to me at school, is to really listen to that person. And the reason why I'm saying this is because when we speak out against oppression and inequality, there is a cost. It is a very expensive cost. However, somehow, if we take collective action, the price gets much less. I think that if I was angry all the time and screaming about things, no one would listen to me. Therefore, I'm very polite. When I'm really polite, and I encourage you to be polite in expressing your dissent against things that are wrong in this world.
It's not so easy to be polite when you want to express everything, especially anger at times. Yeah. Now, August 15th, which is next Monday, I believe, it marks the 77th anniversary of Korea's liberation from Japanese colonial rule.
만세.
만세. 만세. And I'm not speaking for everybody, but some people think whether you're Korean or not, you could be a foreigner that's resided in Korea for some years. But if you're someone who has spent a number of years in Korea, you tend to somehow naturally form this type of, I guess, prejudice against Japan, especially, because you become a Korean when you live here for so long. You may even have these preconceived ideas about Japan as well. So this leads to my question: how should we educate our younger generations? How should the younger generations perceive and remember our history, the Japanese colonial rule, and how can we help them, our younger generation?
I think the most helpful thing that we can do for the younger generation is to tell the truth of what happened, which means that our history is very complicated. It isn't as if there were just bad guys and good guys. It doesn't work that way. If you study oppression in any part of the world, there are often people who participated in things that were morally questionable. Rather than saying that those people who participated, who were ethnically Korean in morally questionable acts, I think it's much more to ask ourselves, what would we do in that situation? It's very easy to pass judgment on people, especially if they're not here. However, if we tell the truth, really, really tell the truth of what happened, even the parts that are really unattractive, it's possible then we can liberate ourselves from the prisons of hatred. I say this very sincerely, because if we only play the victim, I believe that it's also another kind of prison. I want to say this, and I hope that you will understand why I say this. I say this out of love. If we as Koreans around the world expect to be treated with fairness, we too must be fair to all those who are guests in this country or residents or citizens of Korea. So when I read about Koreans being unkind to Vietnamese women who marry farmers, that breaks my heart, because I think we too were once aliens in another land, and we were mistreated. So I think that in order for the next generation to be truly liberated, truly good, decent, productive citizens, not just of Korea, but of the world, it's important to tell the truth and control ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Okay, we've got about 5 minutes left before we move on to our Q&A session. You did say that there will be no sequel to Pachinko. No, it'll never happen. But any other upcoming projects that we could perhaps look forward to? Yes. And I mean, many of your lovely fans are eager to find out about that. And maybe you could tell us about the genre of it, something that you haven't opened up to people about? I mean, have you drawn a plan? Tell us more about it.
Well, I'm working on American Hagwon right now, which is a novel about education and wisdom, and it's killing me. But I will finish it, God willing. And I don't know if you know this, but in my family, I'm the kabugi.
Kobugi meaning?
A turtle.
The slow one?
Yes, exactly. I'm the slow one, but I'm very steady, and I will finish the race as long as I'm healthy. And I want to finish American Hagwon. And the other book that I'm working on is called Name Recognition, and it's a nonfiction book, and it's a kind of memoir about learning how to be vocal and visible and honest in my expression, because it took me a very long time to understand how to do that. And that book is also very difficult to write. I mean, it just essentially, I love writing, but it's also really difficult.
Will it be released soon?
No idea.
No idea. So you're working on two works at the same time?
Well, I was initially working on name recognition, and then I changed the entire format because I'm stupid. And then I decided that I really want to work much more on American Hagwon. And American Hagwon I've been working on for years anyway, because in order for me to visit Hagwons in Singapore, Hong Kong, Taiwan, Korea, Los Angeles, Boston, New York, Washington, D.C., I mean, this is Australia, because the book takes place in Sydney, Australia, Seoul, South Korea, as well as Boston, and mostly in Los Angeles. I had to do so much global research. And then I had to interview Hagwon owners, Hagwon students, as well as parents. And I had to understand the neighborhoods and the socioeconomic classes of all the different groups. So forgive me for laboring on about this, but I want to get it right because it's so important to Koreans. It's a very controversial topic.
I mean, you visited various hagwons. You said Australia even, and we're talking about hagwons that pertain to like Korean students, the ones that Korean students go to, or
Well, actually, either Korean owners,
oh, I see.
Korean students, because Koreans go to places around the world and we build churches and we build hagwons.
Hagwons.
Yeah.
I had no idea there were hagwons for Korean students in Australia and other parts of the world.
Many hagwons.
Oh, wow. Have to check it out. All right, so we do have room for one last question, I think. Let's see. All right, before we move on. Now, you are a source of inspiration to so many of your readers, not only your Korean readers, but readers around the world. What would you like to say to our Korean readers in particular today? They'd be delighted to hear from you.
I want you to know that what you're doing by participating in the act of reading is a form of cultivation of yourself. And I really hope that you recognize that your power as a reader is beyond measure.
Okay, one last one. What would be the best way to get someone into reading, perhaps? I mean, we've got readers here with us in the audience, but I'm sure they have family members or friends that aren't exactly readers. So what's a good way to get people into reading? A very easy, simple strategy, is there?
You know, it's funny because even though you're not reading books, most people are reading probably more than they've ever read in their entire lives. Because people are looking at their phone and they are reading, mostly.
Yeah.
Hopefully not reading only memes. But if you want to cultivate readers, one of the most helpful things is to know that the benefits of reading are extraordinary. And I have interviewed some of the most important people, most powerful people around the world. And the reason why I'm saying that is that if you're an ambitious person and you're not really going to a text to get a deep understanding of something, where you actually have content that's really valuable rather than whatever is free on your phone, you're really very difficult to get ahead. Like when I interview CEOs of companies, really, really high-level companies, they're readers, and very often they even read novels. And people think you have to read business books, but most people who read business books tend to be middle managers. I say that not as an indictment, but actually based upon my research.
All right. They're going to get mad at me if I don't stop now. So we're going to end our little session here and then take a short break listening to an audiobook, and then we'll get back and start with the questions from the audience. 일단 파치코에 담긴 숨은 이야기 작가님과 대담 나눠봤는데요. 여기서 일단 마무리를 하고 이어가도록 하겠습니다. 다음으로는 여러분들의 궁금한 점을 여러분께서 직접 질문을 하고 작가님께서 대답을 해주시는 Q&A 질의응답 시간이 준비되어 있습니다. 그에 앞서 바로 오늘 윌라를 통해 공개된 파친코 오디오북을 들으면서 잠시 숨을 고르고 그 후에 대담을 진행하도록 하겠습니다. 잠시 후에 뵙겠습니다.
일부 고향 1910년부터 1933년까지 일 부산 영도 역사는 우리를 저버렸지만 그래도 상관없다. 20세기로 넘어갈 무렵 늙은 어부와 아내는 가외돈을 얻을 요량으로 하숙을 치기로 했다. 두 사람 모두 영도라는 어촌에서 나고 자랐다. 항구 도시 부산 끄트머리에 있는 폭 8km 정도의 작은 섬이었다. 혼인하여 사는 세월 동안 어부의 아내는 아들 셋을 낳았지만 몸이 가장 약한 큰아들 훈이만 살아남았다. 훈이는 윗입술이 세로로 갈라지고 한쪽 발이 뒤틀린 채로 태어났다. 그렇지만 어깨가 떡 벌어졌고 몸집이 다부졌으며 혈색이 좋았다. 어릴 적 온화하고 사려 깊던 성격은 청년이 돼서도 그대로였다. 훈이가 낯선 사람들 앞에서 습관적으로 갈라진 윗입술을 양손으로 가릴 때면 웃음을 띤 커다란 눈이 잘생긴 아버지와 꼭 닮아 보였다. 이마가 훤하고 눈썹이 먹처럼 진하며 바깥일을 하는지라 늘 햇볕에 건강하게 그을려 있었다. 훈이는 과묵한 부모와 마찬가지로 말솜씨가 좋지는 않았는데 느릿한 말투 때문에 어디가 좀 모자란 아이라고 오해하는 사람들도 있었다. 그러나 이는 사실이 아니었다. 1910년 훈이가 27살이 되던 해에 일제가 강제로 조선의 통치권을 빼앗고 식민지로 삼았다. 궁핍하고 고단한 삶을 억척같이 살아내는 촌사람들일 뿐인 어부와 아내는 나라를 빼앗긴 무능한 양반들과 부패한 위정자들에게 신경 쓸 겨를이 없었다. 집세가 다시 오르자 부부는 하숙인들을 더 받으려고 안방을 내주고 부엌에 딸린 작은 방에서 잤다. 부부가 30년 넘게 새들어 사는 목조가옥은 그리 넓지 않아 47제곱미터가 채 되지 않았다. 장지문을 들여 3칸짜리 집으로 만들고 비가 새는 초가지붕을 어부가 손수 붉은 황토기와로 바꾸어 놓았다. 부산에 있다는 고래등 같은 기와집에 사는 집주인에게만 좋은 일이었다. 나중에는 갈수록 솥이 커지고 회반죽 벽에 걸어놓은 밥상 개수가 늘어나는 바람에 부엌을 채소밭 쪽으로 내어 넓혔다. 아버지가 끝까지 고집해 훈이는 마을의 학교 선생에게 조선어와 일본어를 배웠다. 하숙집 장부를 기록하고 장에서 속지 않을 만큼 셈을 할 줄 알아야 한다는 이유였다. 훈이가 글을 익히고
네, 잘 들어봤습니다. 네, 여러분 조금 더우시죠? 저희가 지금 에어컨을 지금 아주 강하게 틀어놨지만 조금 지금 시원해지고 있는 것 같은데 아무래도 여러분의 열기 때문에 이렇게 더워지는 게 아닌가 싶습니다. Hope you're okay with the temperature. It's cooling up a little bit. Okay. 자, 작가님과의 대담에 이어 이제 파친코 오디오북까지 들어봤는데요. 이번에는 독자분들과 함께하는 현장 Q&A를 진행하도록 하겠습니다. 먼저 현장 Q&A에 참여하는 방법을 안내해 드릴게요. 1층의 경우 통로 마이크 보이실 거예요. 3군데 있고요. 그리고 2층의 경우는 앞쪽에도 보시면은 스탠드 마이크와 함께 저희 스태프분들이 함께 계십니다. 질문이 있으신 분들은 스탠드 위치로 나와 주시면 되고요. 혹시 통로로 나오기 어려우신 분들은 손을 들어주시면은 저희 스텝이 마이크를 전해드릴 수 있을 것 같습니다. 네, 혹시 나오시기 불편하시거나 힘드신 분들은 손을 들어주시면 되겠습니다. 그리고 최대한 많은 분들의 이야기를 들어보고 싶지만 시간 관계상 모든 분들의 질문을 받을 수 없다면 미리 양해 부탁드리고요. 좌석간 공간이 다소 좁다고 아까 말씀드렸죠. 특히 2층의 경우 경사가 지금 가파르기 때문에 안전에 유의하시기 바랍니다. 네, 최대한 지금 이미 스탠드 마이크 쪽으로 모이고 계시는데요. 네, 최대한 마이크 있는 쪽으로 나와주시면 감사하겠습니다. 자, 작가님께서는 통역수신기로 지금 여러분의 이야기를 듣고 계시거든요. 그러니까 편안하게 한국어로 말씀해 주시면 되겠습니다. 자, 그러면은 무대방 기준으로 1층 우측 이쪽부터 저희가 시작을 해보도록 하겠습니다. 진행요원의 안내에 따라 한 분씩 질문 부탁드리겠습니다. We'll start taking questions from. 네.
Hi, Minjin. Thanks so much for coming to Korea and giving us such a good answers. I have 2 questions, but I'm trying not to be greedy. One is, what has been the Japanese audience feedback has been like towards Pachinko? And my second question is, what are some of your favorite books that you've read in the last 2 years? Thanks.
So, the Japanese audience has been extraordinarily supportive of this book. More importantly, the Cheil Kyopo community has written to me quite a lot and supported this book. Even yesterday, several members came to the event at the book signing to tell me that they felt really gratified that their story was told. I have to tell you that for me, that is the most important thing, because I want to honor the history of the Korean Japanese people. It is a very distinct story about the Korean Japanese, and although we can take the allegory and say it is about other issues or other peoples, first and foremost, the experience of the Korean Japanese people is distinct, and it's very different from Korean Americans or Korean Australians. So when they appreciated the book, it meant the world to me. And as for my second question, what books have I enjoyed? I think that recently I finished reading Dirtbag, Dad, which just came out by Isaac Fitzgerald. I think it literally just came out. And Somebody's Daughter by Ashley Ford. Those are contemporary books that perhaps you might enjoy. They're both memoirs.
Thank you.
Thank you.
네, 워낙 많은 분들께서 지금 질문을 하시고 싶어서 줄을 워낙 길게 서 계시는데요. 지금 이제 중앙 마이크로 이동을 하겠습니다. 네, 부탁드립니다.
Good evening, Professor Lee. First of all, it is a great honor to meet you here in Seoul. I'd like to ask you on that, from what kind of perspective do you think the young readers should read this book, Pachinko? And if possible, please give us some advice for the young people living in this modern society. Thank you.
What's your name?
Suyan.
Suyan. It's a pleasure to meet you. I think that I've been very fortunate because I have many young readers, middle-aged readers, and older readers, and readers of both genders and non-binary. I've been very, very fortunate to have this experience. But for me, I do feel so deeply moved when young people read this book, and the response that I often get is that now I realize that my connections and my history matter. Generation Z and the millennials are very interested in the question of identity. And identity is truly important. However, identity without context or history or a sense of connection is actually quite flawed and meaningless. So I hope that if they read this book, one of the things they can understand is that they are connected to their ancestors and to what their ancestors have experienced. And that experience of even inequality and unfairness and the resistance that they have enacted can give you strength. And as an older person, I want you, Suyan, to have strength. So I hope that that's what happens.
Thank you. 네, 이제 무대 방향, 네, 좌측에 계신 분께 질문 받겠습니다.
Hi. I had 3 questions for you if time was allows it. Since this event is in lieu of Korean translated version, I read your book in English, so even though I knew Sonja was living in Yeongdo, I didn't realize that she was speaking in Satori until I saw the excerpts from the Korean version. When you publish your book in other countries, do their translation incorporate this Satori in their translated version? And the second question is, you said this book, your next project, American Hagwon, is the final version of the trilogy. Is there a reason you chose education? Because when I was brought up in America I was brought up in a small town in North Carolina, so there weren't many hagwons around me because there were no Korean towns. But there were more sense of community within Koreans in the churches. So I was wondering why you chose hagwon specifically. And the last question is, you also talked about feminism. You also mentioned during your interview just now, to be treated fairly, we have to treat others fairly as well. What are your thoughts on radical feminism?
Why don't I go back? I'll start with 3, 2, 1.
Okay.
Because I'm old. Okay. I'm a feminist. It's not a dirty word. And anybody who really believes in equality is a radical thinker. The idea of radical feminism is a kind of way to scare women and men and all allies into believing that we cannot believe in equality. Always pay attention to the meaning before the label. I believe that women should be treated equally. I believe that men should be treated equally. I believe that LGBTQ people should be treated equally. I believe all minorities, religious minorities, should be treated equally. A true democracy, an advanced industrial society must have these liberated ideas, even if you don't agree with the way people live or the way people are born in this world. So feminism is only one aspect of saying, I believe in the liberation of human beings. So that's one, which is actually really number 3, isn't it? The second question, I believe, was about, could you refresh me? Because I'm not going back to, I just went to 1, which is about Satori. Why didn't I face that? So as for Satori, I believe there are 35 translations of Pachinko around the world. It would be impossible to learn all those languages and to inspect it. That said, I also want you to be aware, because I know that you are, because you're an Anglophone, that English in many ways is a much simpler language than even Romance languages, which have an honorific and an informal tense. And Korean, like 반말 and 존댓말 and all sorts of other labels that we have, which in many ways I think are intended to have hierarchy and status and meaning. In some ways it's quite wonderful, and in some ways it's really quite 헷갈려, is something that is really intrinsic to each culture. I'm really glad that the translation has Satori in it. I am deeply aware of regionalism in terms of language as well as politics. So I'm sensitive to these ideas, so I'm really glad it's in there. But as for other countries, I do not know. The second question was about...
학원.
Oh, Hagwon. Why did I decide to write about Hagwons? Was that the question? Well, the third part of the trilogy was my exploration of trying to understand what is the most important thing to Koreans around the world. And in my limited sample of, let's say, thousands of Koreans that I've spoken to around the world, whenever I spoke to them, each Korean person, whether from Brazil or Canada, Argentina, Germany, Australia, New Zealand, wherever, I noticed that he, she, or they had very, very strong feelings about education, for good or for bad. So my job as a novelist and a storyteller was to try to figure out what will be the central metaphor. And for me, it made sense, the Hagwon, this private academy in which people are trying to become more educated. Whatever moral values that you have attached to Hagwons, the purpose of any education is ideally improvement of self or improvement of child. So I was interested in writing about that. Thank you.
네, thank you very much. 네, 이제 2층으로 가도록 하겠습니다. 이쪽 우측에서 질문을 받을 텐데요. 작가님께서 지금 통역수신기로 여러분의 이야기를 듣고 계시거든요. 그러니까 편안하게 한국어로도 질문하실 수 있습니다. 그리고 워낙 많은 분들이 지금 줄 서 계셔서 질문은 하나씩만 하실 수 있으시겠죠? 네, 2층에서 질문 받겠습니다.
Hello, I'm Michael. So I just wanted to ask, in Pachinko, the innermost thoughts of characters would seem repugnant to most people in mainstream Korean society, such as Noah secretly wanting to be Japanese, or Chungho wanting Yosef to die so that he can marry Kyunghee, or Mosas's Japanese friend who is a police officer who's gay. Were these thoughts expressed by some of the people you interviewed, and why did you include them in the narrative? What relevance do they have as part of this intergenerational novel?
Where are you? Oh, hi. What's your name?
Oh, Michael, sorry.
Well, I think Michael gets an A+ for reading carefully. So, Michael, I really love what you said. They're so very important because I think human beings are extraordinarily complex. So I think that when my characters have ugly thoughts, it's because I have ugly thoughts. You have ugly thoughts. And if we could read the thought bubbles above every person's head, I think we would be horrified. And yet, some of the worst things that happen in this world is because we have these secret, ugly thoughts, which are actually enacted upon. So for me, in order for me to present them in drama, I am trying to actually explain all the things that I have seen, heard, and witnessed in my interviews as well as in humanity. So part of my job is to study human motivation. And if I can tell you, my reader, what motivates human beings, I have done part of my job. So I have to put that in there.
Thank you. 감사합니다. 네, 2층 좌측 마이크로 이동을 하겠습니다. 질문하실까요?
Good evening, Ms. Lee. From your books and your thoughts, I get the idea that you care a lot about ordinary people and socially marginalized people, and that is one of the reasons why I like you very much. My question is, where did your warmth and care towards ordinary people come from?
What is your name, sweetheart?
My name is Yemin.
Yemin? It's a pleasure to meet you. I'm an ordinary person. And it's an honor to meet you, an extraordinary person who's sharing her time with me. I think that each of us actually are fairly ordinary. Sometimes we have remarkable lives, and I also believe that unremarkable people can have remarkable moments. Each one of us has remarkable moments in our lives, and it's really quite an honor to write stories about us. So I'm really gratified that I get to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Another question from here. 네, 1층 질문 받겠습니다.
Hi, I'm Sarah, age 25. Thank you so much for writing the book. Has literally changed my life so much. I think with the success of Pachinko, we've seen that stories of Korean women, it sells and sells a lot. Why do you think now the global audience is willing to and also wants to hear more stories of Korean women? And what do you think makes us Korean women really special characters?
I don't know if the world wants to learn more about Korean women. As a matter of fact, I think Korean women are still having a very difficult time. I also think that Korean men are having a really difficult time. When I think about the military conscription requirements of every Korean male in both South Korea and North Korea and the extraordinary sacrifices they have to make, my heart really goes out to them. I'm a mother of a son. That said, what makes Korean women extraordinary? I don't know. I feel like I might have to result in making stereotypes, but in my experience of having interviewed so many Korean women is that despite the extraordinary oppression of patriarchy, I mean, it doesn't take a scientist to know that the Yi dynasty, a very fairly recent dynasty, if you look at what women have to go through in order to be considered women, it's really quite unfair. One of the things that I want to share is the level of illiteracy for women in the Yi dynasty was over 98%. So when you hear about women in the Yi dynasty being literate, I want you to know that it's a teeny tiny portion. And as a matter of fact, you could be a Yangban woman, a noble woman, and still not be encouraged to read. And she couldn't be appearing in public. So that wasn't that long ago. So the fact that women today are participating in education and in the economy and also trying to balance relationships, motherhood, in a society that's fairly unsupporting of that, I quite think that's remarkable. And I really hope very, very much that we can be allies with each other and really support relationships between men, women, women and women, men and men, whatever, in order for us to have a more productive society. Because at the end of the day, I believe that hatred and oppression is actually bad business. That's a very, very strange answer to your question, but it's what I have today.
Thank you. 중앙 마이크로 이동하겠습니다.
Whoa, it's an honor to be meeting you again. My heart is beating so fast. Like, I hope you can hear it. But I don't think this mic is good enough.
What is your name?
My name is Kathy.
Oh, Kathy, hi. How
Hello.
are you?
Great, thank you.
I saw you yesterday, is that right?
Yes.
That's right.
Thank you for recognizing me. Oh, so
I
my
met
question
you
is...
I met you at Andover.
Yes. It's an honor to get to see you 3 times. My question is on, I guess, name recognition, the book you talked about. Please correct me if I'm wrong, but I heard it was about like confrontation, speaking out. And as a Korean and a woman, right, I have a father, and this is a hypothetical, but if I were to disagree with him on something about feminism or something regarding Asian women, how do you think I should approach that without jeopardizing our relationship? And yeah, what would be the best way?
Well, for this hypothetical daughter who may have a hypothetical argument with her hypothetical father, this is, by the way, my wheelhouse because I'm a writer. I want you to know something, Kathy, because I know that you're a young woman. Your father, if you are fortunate to have a father, and I could tell because I can't make a generalization about all fathers, but the fact that you're so concerned about having this relationship intact means that he probably loves you deeply. Because if he was a bad father, you wouldn't care about rupturing that relationship. So if your father loves you deeply, and I feel like I'm making a fairly fair deduction, he wants to know you. And if, in order for him to know you, you have to show yourself to him. So that vulnerability is an extraordinary act of risk. But in order for your love to grow in a fair and true and honest way, you must tell him what you think. As I said earlier, I am an angry person, upset about the world, and yet I am very polite. Try to think about what you want to say before you say it. Try to think about how he would feel hearing it, but always remember that this conversation comes out of love and about truth, and with the hope that in your vulnerability, that he will love you more for having taken that risk. I hope that that's what happens too.
I'm getting all teary-eyed. 네, 이쪽 마이크에서 질문 받겠습니다.
네, 안녕하세요. 만나서 반갑습니다. 이민진 작가님. 네, 제가 처음으로 한국어로 질문을 하고 있는 것 같은데요. 네, 여기 한국 맞죠? 네. 네, 사실 네, 감사합니다. 네, 저는 초등학교 2학년 남자아이를 키우고 있는 엄마이기도 하고요. 그다음에 엄마들인데 독서에 굉장한 열정을 가진 분들과 함께 북클럽을 하고 있는 또 북클럽 짱이기도 합니다. 네. 사실 작년 가을에 그 북클럽에서 엄마들과 함께 시간을 쪼개가면서 저희가 그 빠찡코를 함께 읽었는데 애플에서 그 방영한다는 소식은 들었지만 이렇게 빠찡코가 전 세계적인 반향을 일으킬지는 정말 몰랐어요. 그래서 이 자리가 더 특별하고요. 선생님께서 언급하신 아메리칸 학원, 특히 제가 이제 아이를 키우고 있는데 저도 사실 오늘 학원가에서 아이를 이제 픽업하고 또 이렇게 바쁜 시간을 냈는데 선생님께서 오늘 또 아메리칸 학원에 대해서 또 어떤 지혜, 그다음에 에듀케이션에 대해서 언급을 하신다고 하셔서 굉장히 기대가 되고 한편으로는 조금 두렵기도 합니다. 선생님께서 너무 또 날카롭게 가로지르시진 않을까. 하지만 또 선생님의 필력을 믿기 때문에 더 큰 기대를 하고 있습니다. 오늘 제가 궁금한 거는 제가 그 작년에 북클럽을 하면서 어떤 분이 저에게 질문하셨는데 끝내 대답을 못한 부분이 있어서 질문을 하러 왔습니다. 파첸코는 3부작으로 구성되어 있는데요. 각 그 부를 시작할 때마다 뭐 찰스 디킨스 그리고 박완서 선생님 그리고 마지막에는 제가 지금 너무 떨려가지고 잊어버렸는데 그 에피그래프 형식으로 이제 그렇게 쿼트를 해주셨는데 그 의미에 대해서 좀 질문을 드리고 싶었어요. 뭐 찰스 디킨스, 박완서 그리고 마지막이 뭐였죠? 여러분들 다 읽으셨죠? 네, 그래서 질문.
Benedict Anderson.
Frederick Anderson.
No,
yeah, right.
Benedict Anderson. He's an anthropologist.
Yeah, right. Thank you, Minjin Lee. What's the meaning of the part?
So the reason why I include the epigraphs for each of the 3 books is because I am primarily interested in centering you to what motivated me and carried me through some of those sections. I was deeply moved by Park Won-sa's book, Who Ate All the Shingas? And I loved this idea of a child living in Korea thinking that because all she could see is Korea, everything is Korea. I thought that was so true of a child's point of view. And so when in that section, which is book 2, I put that there and I wanted you to know that I'm influenced by so many different kinds of writers, including Park Won-sa. So that's why it's there. Benedict Anderson, who wrote the book Imagine Communities, which is considered one of the most important books of thinking about anthropology and also about how we understand tribalism. These imagined communities is something that I think about quite a lot because I think that the 21st century Korean person is very, very global in my experience. And it's not just the elite Koreans who feel this way. I have met many working class Koreans who might have very little money, maybe make $20,000, $30,000 a year, and yet they spend $300 or $400 on hagwonbis for their little child at age 4 or 5 to learn English because they have a strong wish to create a global child. I find that in many ways very moving. So that's the reason why I have imagined communities in there. And also I want to respect scholarship of academics. I cannot be a writer of fiction unless there were scholars who are spending their entire lives ingesting entire libraries in order to produce one tome in which I can read and understand their life of learning. So I'm always indebted to scholars, to academics. And the first section of Charles Dickens, I put that in there because a quote about home is so deeply moving. And above all, when I was growing up, especially when I was little, I read a lot of Dickens. And I found his love for regular people to be quite affecting.
네, thank you very much. 2층에 질문 있으신 분 계신가요? 네, 질문 받겠습니다.
Hi, Minjin. I'd like to confess that I'm a huge fan of yours, that I dropped off my 2-year-old baby at my mother-in-law's place and came here. So glad to see you. My question is, you talked about the importance of telling the truth, but Tokyo still denies some of the historical facts truth, as we can see from the example of its controversial history textbook. And sometimes us, ordinary people, feel powerless because it's too hard to make a change in terms of telling the truth. In such situation, what can we do in our everyday lives to make a change and just go on? Yeah.
I think that for all of us who care about truth, and I bet you that if I interviewed every person in this room, we would all say that we care about the truth. It's very difficult to enforce this wish to other people. And I say that because you could spend your entire life trying to make somebody else tell the truth, but most likely you will not succeed. Recently in America, Alex Jones, who is a conspiracy theorist, was put on trial and he lost by default, and there was a sentencing of what he owed the families. And Alex Jones claimed that this very horrific shooting where 26 little children were murdered in Connecticut was not true. He said it was a hoax. And I cannot imagine how hurtful it was for the parents as well as the community members to lose their children and to be told that what didn't happen. And that wasn't something that happened 100 years ago or 200 years ago. It actually happened, and most of us were witnesses of that history. And yet, many, many, many people believed him. Alex Jones is an American person, and people believed him. And the parents who lost their children were not believed. Could you imagine how frustrating that must be? Yes, it's absolutely true. There are Japanese and non-Japanese historians who argue that some of the terrible things that happened to Koreans, as well as to comfort women of other countries, didn't happen. Yes, that actually is existing today. There are many people who are fighting that, and that's great. However, I think for ordinary people like us, we can say we disagree with that, and we can also continue to tell the truth ourselves. And I say this because your energy is limited, your talents are infinite, and I would like your talents to be exploited in an effective way. I did not talk very much about comfort women in my book because it's a subject that is so deeply, deeply important to me. And yet, in this work, I thought that it would not be treated appropriately. So it is in there, but it's not in there in a casual way. It's in there because it was a constant current that occurred throughout this book, that awareness of it. I also think that Koreans have a very complicated history with that tragic event. And also, as I said earlier, we ourselves have done things that we're not proud of, whether it's in Gwangju, or whether it's in Vietnam, or whether it's in Jeju. There's a very complex, bloody history of Korea that all of us participate in and know about. And I think fixing those things will be good too.
네, 다음 질문 받겠습니다. 네. 네, 질문 받겠습니다.
Hi, it's such an honor to be in your presence today and to be able to stand here and ask you a question personally. So thank you so much. I wanted to ask you what your experience was while writing this book, putting all these Korean history, culture, emotions that I, as a Korean person, have trouble expressing in English. I was wondering what your experience was like as a Korean American. I'm sorry, my voice is shaking so much. I'm so nervous. But yes, I wanted to ask how it was like, what it was like putting your history, culture, and emotions that I feel are sometimes unique to Koreans, putting that in English. I wanted to ask what that was like. And also, this could be somewhat personal, so you don't have to answer this if you don't want to, but I was wondering if it was a bit emotionally draining to constantly have to deal with trauma, oppression, and put it into words, put it smartly into words that other people could also relate to. So I'm not sure if you really understood what I'm asking. I think I'm just rambling, but yes, those are my questions.
So
Thank you.
your question is connected to the previous questioner's question.
Yes.
And I really like that. And by the way, the previous questioner had mentioned that she dropped off her child at her mother-in-law's to come here. And I should have said thank you for doing that. So forgive me. And the reason why I say thank you for doing that is because I remember being a mother of a young child, and I wanted so much to have an intellectual life. and I felt so starved. And it was so difficult for me because even though I loved my child, I also loved my mind. And it was a really difficult balance. So I want to thank you for coming, truly. And it also comes back to your question of why did I decide and how was it to write this book? And I felt like I didn't understand why that when I was 19 years old, I attended a lecture about the Korean Japanese people in which I heard a very terrible story about a little Korean boy being bullied and being motivated to kill himself by his peers. And that story was burned into my brain and I really couldn't forget it. And that motivated me to write this book because I wanted to write the history that was wrong. And I don't mean W-R-I-T-E, I mean R-I-G-H-T. I wanted to correct the thing that I thought was wrong. So like your previous questioner had said, there are people who deny the terrible things that had happened, who may be Japanese historians or historians who just deny things. I mean, there are Holocaust deniers still. And I thought what I would like to do is to correct this deficiency and the incorrect aspect because I thought the world should know what happened to Koreans in Japan and what happened to Koreans in Korea, how a country was stolen from the people. And then later on, it was divided. And in order for me to understand that, I knew I had to write about Japan. That said, I think that in my experience and in my research, many Korean Japanese people have told me that they were treated with kindness by many individual Japanese people. And if you know that, you can't make all Japanese people into villains. So that was another sense of responsibility. So I have a responsibility to you. I have a responsibility to the people that I interviewed. I have a responsibility above all to the truth. And the truth is not easy. It's not black and white. And therefore, all of the shading and all of the ugly thoughts, which I think it was Michael had brought up earlier, had to be inserted into telling a true emotional novel.
네, 감사합니다. 아직 많은 분들께서 지금 질문을 하기 위해 줄을 서 계시는데 이쪽으로 1층으로 네, 이쪽 우측으로 이동을 해서 질문 받겠습니다.
예, 안녕하세요. 만나 뵙게 해서 영광입니다, 작가님. 제가 이 소설을 보고 되게 감명 깊게 읽었는데요. 제가 그 전에 되게 재밌게 읽었던 소설인 대부가 생각이 났습니다. 어느 정도 공통점이 있거든요. 한 가문의 역사를 한 가문의 연대기를 다루는 대하 소설이라는 점, 그리고 음지에 관련된 직업이 나온다는 거, 그리고 또 이건 영화 얘기긴 하지만 3부작으로 되어 있다는 점 등 어느 정도 공통점이 느껴졌는데요. 혹시 제1교포들이 나오는 대부 같은 소설을 쓰고 싶다 같은 의도를 갖고 쓰신 건지 아니면 그저 우연이었는지 궁금했습니다.
Well, thank you so much for coming and for your question. I have read Mario Puzo's Godfather. However, I want to make this really clear. So as much as I admired The Godfather when I read it, I think I was 12 or 13, in no way are the Korean Japanese gangsters. In no way are they gangsters. In no way are they criminals. And it's very, very, very important to me that I say this because that would be the very opposite of my intention of writing Pachinko. The Korean Japanese people suffer every single day by being insulted, by being called criminals and gangsters and dirty and untrustworthy and immoral today. So I would never, ever perpetuate this horrible stereotype of Koreans being this way. Even though the Korean Japanese people had no choice but to work in an industry that the Japanese, the majority culture, looked down upon. So many people that I met were profoundly noble, honest, and good. So I would not ever portray the Korean Japanese people as gangsters. I hope the record will stand on that point. That said, I think The Godfather individually is a great book.
네, 중앙에서 질문 받겠습니다.
Hi, Imin진. It's a huge honor to meet you here today. My name is Sunjae, and okay, wait a second. I'm so nervous today. So I want to talk about my quick review about that you talked today for the first time that you talked that this novel is a lie. And we have to participate in it about your story. And it reminded me of the Min-ha Kim, the actress who had a role as Sunja. It reminded me of her interview that she said Sunja is fragile but also very resilient. And I read the article that you wrote on NY Times, and I read it and I thought like, how this woman could be so charismatic and empowering after her puberty. So yeah, thank you for being here because you mean a lot to me today, and maybe the other audience here would think same as I do. So thank you. And this is my question. 질문은 한국어로 할게요. 제 질문은 뭐냐면은 사실 아까 국제 결혼에 대해서 짧게 얘기를 해주셨는데 저는 우리나라에서 국제 결혼율이 가장 높은 곳에서 왔거든요. 근데 이제 그곳에 살다 보면 느끼게 되는 게 이렇게 이 국제 결혼을 사실 대부분 여성분들이 이주를 많이 해오시니까 굉장히 다수를 이 좁은 마을 안에서 차지하고 있음에도 불구하고 사회적으로 우리가 가진 어떤 인식들이 그들을 굉장히 올가매고 있다는 것을 느낄 수 있었어요, 살면서. 근데 아까 또 많은 분들이 또 질문을 해주신 게 어떻게 보면 이 소설이 관통하고 있는 게 우리의 그 일제 강점기부터의 역사잖아요. 근데 사실 한국인들 또 이제 한국이란 나라가 공식적으로도 어떻게 보면 우리가 피해자라는 그 생각에서 아직 벗어나지 못했고 또 스스로를 어떻게 보면 피해자라는 그 프레임 안에서 나오려는 시도를 강하게 하지 못하고 있다고 생각을 하거든요. 그런데 아까 작가님께서 말씀하신 것처럼 이주 여성이라든지 또 몇 년 전에 이제 그 제주도 난민 이슈가 있었잖아요. 그런 것들에 대해서는 굉장히 우리가 어떻게 보면 지금 21세기적이지 못한 글로벌하지 못한 태도로 일관을 하고 있으면서 동시에 가해자를 이렇게 태도를 갖고 있다라는 생각이 드는데 그런 것에 대해서 어떻게 저는 또 약간 젊은 아시안 여성이니까 이런 제가 어떤 자세를 갖고 이 세상에서 살아가면서 또 아까 다른 분께서 그 아버지와의 이야기 해주셨는데 그 우리의 윗세대를 존중하고 그들을 침해하지 않는 선에서 어떤 자세를 갖고 살아가야 되는지 그런 조언을 듣고 싶습니다.
So thank you, Sanjay, for your very, very thoughtful comments and your question. So what should we think? I think it's very important that you and I do not participate in propagating more stereotypes about Koreans. So, for example, when I interview Koreans sometimes in different parts of the world, I have heard Korean women, ethnically Korean women, say to me, oh, Korean namja is this, that, or that. And I always ask them, how many Korean namja do you know? And I say this a little bit with a smile because it's so important for me to convince her that she cannot participate in stereotypes. So in the area that you come from, you have witnessed the inequality that the allegedly foreign women have experienced. And I say allegedly because perhaps they have become citizens now, I don't know. It will take a long time for a 5,000-year-old civilization that really prided itself on racial purity to start thinking about integration and democracy. It begins with you, it begins with me. However, if we keep saying that Koreans are xenophobic, then in a way, we're not really telling the truth. Because I would argue, because you are part of that community and you are not xenophobic, that one should not say all Koreans are xenophobic. And I would argue that in your community, there are probably many people who have extended kindness to these women. And I would like to recognize them too. There are villains among us. Sometimes we are the villains. And I think that the only thing that we can do in terms of the attitude that you asked me to prescribe is to be truthful, even when we are harmful. That's very hard to do. It's very hard to say, I messed up. I thought the wrong thing. I said it the wrong way. It's very hard to say, I am sorry. But in some ways, after we do that, it's really quite liberating because then we can start again. I think one of the reasons why the earlier questioner, and I wish I had remembered her name. No, actually, I didn't ask her name. Forgive me. When she had talked about the person who is the denier of history, who is a Japanese historian, it hurts us. It hurts us when we think that our truth doesn't matter. But I think that if we continue to uphold our truths and we continue to recognize the humanity of every individual Korean person, then we participate in a new world. And I know this sounds terribly naive, but I believe that the new world can exist. I have to.
네, 지금 시간이 많이 남지 않았습니다. 한 15분 정도 남았는데 워낙 많은 분들께서 지금 줄 서 계시기 때문에 최대한 많은 질문들을 받을 수 있도록 해볼게요. 그리고 저희가 시간을 조금 연장해서 한 9시까지 조금 더 시간을 연장하고 질문을 받도록 하겠습니다. 네, 이쪽 3번 마이크로. 네.
Good evening, Miss Lee, Mrs. Lee, Minjin. It's an honor to be here. First of all, I'd like to offer myself as a subject for your research for American Hagwon as a former student at an international Hagwon and the son of a Hagwon owner. And I think
you
I
check
could,
2 boxes.
and I think I can offer a pretty interesting perspective on the issue of education and social status, money, and family. And with regards to my question, it's a question about free food for millionaires. Sorry, I didn't take your public speaking class, so I may not be super coherent with this, but it's essentially I'm curious about sympathy and empathy because on paper, a lot of your characters do morally questionable things, sometimes despicable things, especially a character like Ted Kim. He cheats on his wife.
I love Ted.
I love Ted too. And unfortunately,
so sexy.
I see, unfortunately, I think I see too much of myself in him. And so I hate him in many ways. But so back to my question, he does a lot of despicable things, but you're so good at moving in and out of these characters' inner monologues and empathizing with your characters that it almost seems like you're sympathizing and you're justifying their actions. For example, Ted cheating on his pregnant wife, or Ted leaving his wife and children for, I believe she was a secretary. And so I was wondering whether you do sympathize and to a certain extent understand where they're coming from, or it's just on the level as like an author, you're empathizing with these characters and understanding their character motivation.
What's your name?
My name is Gi-ju.
Gi-ju?
That's right.
Oh, I like that. So, for those of you who have not Free Food for Millionaires, it's a great book. The reason why I'm saying this is because Free Food for Millionaires, for me, is a much more important book. It's a much more difficult book to write than Pachinko. I know it's shocking. And people often think that because it's a first book, it's autobiographical. It's the most unautobiographical book I can think of. It required so much research. Like, for example, I attended Harvard Business School and pretended to apply. I took an entire class on hat making at FIT to write that book. It was so hard to write. And I wrote it because I was writing about immigrants in America, so that's the reason why I wrote it. But as for how do I feel about despicable people or despicable actions, so in Pachinko, for those of you who have read Pachinko, like Hansu is a despicable character. He does despicable things. And yet, for me, I try to understand why he does those things. And in all of my thousands of interviews, I'm going to tell you something really interesting, Kichu. I have never met a person who thinks he's a bad person. Because each person is a hero in her own story. So she always has a reason as to why she does what she does. He always has a reason as to why he does what he does. And it's my job to tell the truth about what he's thinking. You as a reader may say, I disagree. Is it wrong to cheat on your wife? Yes, it is wrong to cheat on your wife. Is it wrong to leave your pregnant wife? Yes, it is wrong to leave your pregnant wife. But if you happen to have done those things, do you have a reason? Probably a very good one. In your mind, you think it's the best possible reason. In your mind, you're thinking there had to be no other reason. So part of my job as someone who wants to tell the emotional truth is to expose that truth in fiction. Do I sympathize with them? Yes, absolutely. Do I agree? Would I do those things? It's unlikely. I have a very boring, quiet life.
네, 1층에서 질문 받고 2층으로 가도록 할게요. 1번 마이크 질문 하시겠어요? 네. Go ahead, yes.
Hi, my name is Teresa, and it is my honor to have you here. Thank you so much. And yes, I kind of grew up with Free Food for Millionaires as well. Yeah, and I wrote my college essay on that, and Harvard accepted it, so it was a great book. Thank you. Well, yeah, I'm a third culture kid, so-called. I was born and raised in Japan and grew up in the States, and now I'm living in Korea and worked in France for a while. And I had to always ceaselessly deal with like the question of who I am, the question of identity that I would rather call authenticity. So while I was reading your book, Pachinko, I was really impressed by the way you engage like this temporal or generational narrative and individual particularity into this like grand universal historical narrative. And each characters that you just mentioned, each of those attractive characters, they were like, excuse me, they reminded me of Dr. Faust while struggling not only with their identity, but also with their authenticity, who they are, with this anthropos with the like internal animal instinct of human beings and the godly, holy life of like high moral value. So in order to become a human being, so that was why I got really impressed and moved on to my question that how would you say to those people who are still struggling? Well, luckily for me, I believe that I have developed my own identity as a cosmopolitan, which luckily that I had not entrapped with a certain ethnicity or like the dominant cultural influence. So, well, go back to the question, how would you say to those who are still struggling or still working on and defining their authenticity, who they are, their maybe identity, through this book, like how would they reconcile their own particularity with this like universal, worldly, cosmopolitan world currently?
What is your name, sweetie?
Teresa.
Teresa. So Teresa's asking a question about how to cultivate identity and authenticity. And in your complex question, which I really admire in so many ways, I want to talk about the difference between what I say I am and what you say I am. This always happens. So I could say, I am a writer. I am a ajama. And you say what you think of me. All of you have been so generous about your praise toward me tonight. I'm very, very touched. And at the same time, I'm surprised because I don't think of myself in the way you think of me, and yet I don't deny your reality of me. I think of myself as deeply flawed and slow and not very bright. If I was more clever, perhaps I would have written at least 4 books by now. But all I'm just trying to say to you is that there's always going to be an external definition and an internal definition, and somewhere we have to mediate that truth, and it's a difficult thing to do. I don't think that anybody has all of this figured out in terms of who you are, but I don't mind. As a matter of fact, I'm here because I have told people I am an ethnically Korean person who is an American citizen, who was born in Seoul. I was made in Korea. And my father is from Wonsan, North Korea. My mother is from Busan, South Korea. I was born in Seoul. And every single aspect of those geographical truths have formed me. And I do not reject them. I don't think there's some sort of utopian label which will somehow deracinate me, de-ethnicize me from my truth. As a matter of fact, I think all those things, the accretion of every single label, form who I am, and that is okay. So I encourage you, as you become older, to be open to even the projections that may be wrong, because it's always information. So if somebody said to me, you are X, I may feel that I am not X, but I will consider what you say. Absolutely. Thank you.
And we'll take the next question. 2번 마이크에서 질문 받겠습니다. 네, 1층, 네. 중앙 마이크.
Before I ask my question, I first want to say that this is one of my remarkable moments of my personal life, because every second that I am spending right now is the step forward to my dream of being an author like you. And my question is that during your interview, you mentioned about the meaning, and that meaning enabled you to continue writing this novel. And this is also the topic that really close to my heart, because my dream is to be a messenger of hope and be a messenger of meaning where this meaning lacks so much in this world. But I feel like I'm constantly meeting the obstacle that is both inside me and both inside other people, that continually distrust this existence of meaning. And especially in this postmodernism world, and in this world that we all think we know everything, and we all think we know all despair, I feel like I feel like there is a dilemma of how to deliver this message to other people, and how to convince myself of this truth.
What is your name?
My name is David Wee.
David. So, David, as you embark on your journey of becoming the artist that you want to be, I want to encourage you to unburden yourself. You're carrying a very, very heavy load. You are, because you do wish to be a messenger of hope. But I think your job actually as an artist is just to tell the truth. And if what you do in your truth somehow gives another person hope, then that's the byproduct of telling the truth. In a million years, you could not have told me that this would happen to me today. I wouldn't have believed you. Do I believe that I deliver hope? I hope so, but it never was part of my job description. Because if I had that enormous burden, it might have crushed me. And I see you and I could feel how much love and goodness is coming from you. I could feel it all the way here. And I really want you to succeed. So I want to unburden you. And I want to tell you to please tell the truth of what you want to say and what others say and what others believe about you and about the mission that you and I have. That is their job, but it's not our job. Our job is just to tell the truth. I wish you well.
네, 행운을 빕니다. 조금 전에 나왔던 책이죠. 100만 장자를 위한 공짜 음식, Free Food for Millionaires 도서가 12월에 재출간된다고 합니다. 많이 읽어보시기 바랍니다. 3번 맥에서 질문 받겠습니다.
안녕하세요.
안녕.
어제 싱가포르에서 날아온 김연주라고 합니다. 만나 뵙게 돼서 반갑습니다. 네.
안녕하세요.
안녕하세요.
반갑습니다.
저는 싱가포르에서 제일교포분과 그리고 일본에서 3년 이상 사신 분, 이런 여러 경험을 가지신 분들과 북클럽을 하고 있습니다. 앞서 말하셨던 분처럼. 그래서 그분들과 얘기를 하면서 정말로 다양한 이야기를 할 수 있어서 이런 기회를 주신 작가님께 정말로 감사드리고 싶었어요. Thank you so much, Minjin, for the book. 그래서 사실 제가 싱가포르에서 지난 7년 동안 살았는데 살면서 제가 현재 갖고 있는 이 질문들이 앞서 말씀하셨던 분들과 많이 겹치는 부분이 있는 것 같아요. 정체성과 관련된 것입니다. 그래서 저는 한국 사람이지만 바깥에서 살면서 제 정체성이 조금씩 이제 흐트러져 가는 걸 느끼면서 어떻게 하면 제가 한국 사람으로서 해외에서 자랑스러운 한국 사람이 될 수 있을까? 작가님께서 책에서 말씀하셨던 것처럼 모두가 자랑스러운 한국 사람이 되기 위해서 노력하고 있잖아요. 그래서 그때 작가님이 책을 쓰셨을 때 생각하셨던 자랑스러운 한국 사람의 정의와 그리고 지금 21세기 2022년을 살아가면서 많은 것을 보시면서 혹시 새롭게 정의된 자랑스러운 한국인의 뜻이 있다면 그거를 제게 좀 알려주셨으면 좋겠어요. 왜냐하면 이거는 영어로 말할게요. 아닌가? 저는 한국 사람으로서 이제 민진 작가님의 전에 인터뷰를 봤을 때 책을 쓰시는 목적이 한국을 세계에 알리기 위한 거라고 말씀하셨잖아요. 저 또한 해외에 살아가면서 한국을 해외에 알리는 그런 사람이 되고 싶습니다. 그렇기 때문에 민진 작가님께 이 질문을 꼭 하고 싶었어요. What is your definition of a proud Korean? 감사합니다.
I think if I understand the question to be how can you be a proud Korean elsewhere, I think it's the same question of being a proud Korean in Korea. Also, the most important question is why do we have to be proud? Can we just be Korean? And I say this, I'm not saying this in disagreement with what you're saying. I'm saying this out of respect for what you just said. Because very often people think that I am a proud Korean. And I am a proud Korean. And yet, I'm also just a Korean who allows herself not to be defined by others. So very often people respond to the fact that I'm saying, I'm allowed to be me, and you are allowed to be you. And I refuse to make generalizations about Koreans. I fight against it all the time, even with other Koreans. So when a Korean person says to me that Korean women are this way, or Korean mothers are this way, or Korean children are this way, and this could be coming from my students, I will again say something like, how many Korean mothers do you know? You know your mother. Because I've heard this very often from the immigrants. They will say, like I'll meet a Korean from Maryland, let's say, and she will say to me, well, you know, Korean mothers do this. And I will say, are you sure? Are you sure? Because I'm a Korean mother and I don't do that. And I don't say that to be disrespectful, but I'm actually saying I recognize your humanity and your individual fullness. And by recognizing it, I have to disagree with you. And we cannot participate in creating more stereotypes of ourselves. I also think there are aspects of Korean history in which we are not proud, and yet I turn to them very often. People have said to me, you wrote about a history that was very humiliating for Koreans. And I think in that humiliation and oppression and colonization, it was one of the greatest moments for Koreans because we resisted by asserting our humanity. When things are very, very horrible, that's when you really know who you are. And things were very, very horrible for Koreans during the colonial era. And when Koreans maintained their humanity and dignity and generosity, then that was extraordinary. So I hope for you and for me that we live lives that bear fruit, that manifest the quality that other people could say that they're proud of us, rather than us saying that we're proud of ourselves. That would be quite something. And I know that you in your heart care about this very much, I could tell. And I wish you courage to insist on who you are. So thank you.
네, 감사합니다. 정말 오래 기다리셨어요. 2층 4번 마이크에서 질문 받겠습니다. 네, 질문 주시겠어요?
Hi, Minjin. It's a great honor for me to meet you here. I've been a fan of you and your writings for a long time, and I'm a mother too. And I took a day off to be here. Well, at first, last year I read your book in English, which is very challenging for me because I was born and raised in Korea. But while I was reading your Pachinko in English, I felt very strange because I felt like your novel was speaking to me in Korean. That was very strange feeling for me. So I was kind of reluctant to read the Korean version, Korean translation of Pachinko because I was afraid that might ruin my great feeling about the impression about the book. But I tried to read the translation because I had to be here. So I was wondering how the second print of the Korean translation of Pachinko is different from the first one, which was published in 문학사상사. And if you were involved in the translation process, how was that? And I have one second quick question. I really love your thesis statement on the Pachinko, which is history has failed us, but no matter. So I was wondering if you have your own thesis statement for your life as a woman, as a Korean, as an American, as a writer, for your history, if you have your own thesis statement. Thank you.
Oh, by the way, thank you for for doing Teng Teng today, to come today. I'm sorry to hear that you didn't go to work, but I'm glad that you're here. Yesterday, there were, several people in the book line who Teng Teng 부리는가? I think like 4 or 5 people, and I felt like I am bringing down the Korean GDP. So I'm sorry. But I want to go back to this thesis statement of my life. I don't know if I have a thesis statement for my life, but I can say that I have a statement that I think about as a governing principle for every decision that I make, and it's choose the important over the urgent. Choose the important over the urgent. Very often, especially in the 21st century, we are made to feel that you have to do things urgently. Very often, answer the email, answer the text, everything's urgent. But is it really important? And if you ask yourself that question for every single thing, you'll realize most things are not that important. And it's very helpful, because if you don't know what's important, you will have spent your life doing things for other people's urgency. And I want you to respect your inner voice. Going back to the earlier sense, I think the question was about the translation process. I have been incredibly fortunate to have true translations of Pachinko. And I'm going to tell you that the work of translators is holy work. It is so difficult. When I think of people who can speak more than one language and master it, it is extraordinary to me. It's like you told me you know how to fly. So I would never criticize the prior translation, because the translator put her heart and soul into that work, so I'm very grateful for it. I was very involved, much more so involved in this translation, and what I really cared about is the structural integrity of my work. The book is divided into 3 parts. I have a very clear reason why I did that. And also the titles for each chapter, which were in the prior version, have been removed, as that was my intention. There are other little things that were there which I really care about. I really am so grateful for the work of Shim Seung-mi, who did the translation for the influential version, and I'll leave it at that. So thank you.
네, 감사합니다. 정말 시간이 많이 남질 않았어요. We have less than 5 minutes left, and we still have many questions. We'll take another question from, yes, 네, 2층 5번 마이크에서 질문 받겠습니다.
Hi, Minjin. I really look forward to seeing you today, and thank you for coming today, and thank you for this remarkable novel. I'm your big fan, and I'm a banker in South Korea now, and but I have a dream of to be a lawyer or being novelist. You were a lawyer before, and you are a novelist now. So I have 2 questions. That is, what gives you inspiration in your daily life as a novelist or writer? And question 2, when was you were a lawyer, how could you endeavor to be a novelist? Thank you.
Could we possibly just get to one question and then give someone else a chance to answer? So if you could choose one of the 2 questions, which question would that be? 다른 분께 기회를 드려야 될 것 같아서 질문 하나만 선택해 주시면 감사하겠습니다.
When once you were a lawyer, how could you endeavor to be a novelist?
How could I? What was the verb?
다시 한번 부탁드릴게요.
How could you endeavor to be a novelist?
How did you
Endeavor. Is that the word?
Yeah.
Endeavor. Okay. So thank you so much for your questions. I really, having been a lawyer and now am a novelist, I still feel like a lawyer in my mind. So I think that it never changes. So I'm very grateful for that education that I have, because I'm really not afraid of really complex legal issues because I've had that legal training, but I'm really grateful not to be a lawyer anymore. How did I endeavor to be a novelist? What ended up happening was I worked as a corporate lawyer for 2 years, and I was really good at being a very low-level lawyer, which means that all I had to do as a corporate lawyer is to read a lot of documents, find problems, and tell my senior partner. And then I would write these long reports about problems. So it was very suited for my personality. But because I was so good at it, I got endless amounts of work. I was essentially almost oppressed for a very high salary. because I had this liver disease that was quite serious, which I don't have anymore, I knew that I would get sick in my 20s and 30s in a very grave way. So when I quit being a lawyer, it was very simple for me, because I thought if I was going to die in my 20s or 30s, then I might as well do something that I really want to do. I just didn't know that writing novels would be so difficult for me. I know for other people it's simpler. I admire them, but for me it's very difficult.
Okay, thank you. 네, 정말 시간이 남지 않아서 시간 관계상 저희 마지막으로 질문 1번 마이크에 계신 분께 마지막 질문을 받도록 하겠습니다. 네,
네.
질문 해주시겠어요?
안녕하세요. 안녕하세요. I'm so honored to be the last one. I'm sure everyone has such important questions. So I wanted to just say thank you, Minjin, because this book, Chupachenko, has helped me translate love. So I live with my grandparents right now, so I'm kind of the Solomon of the family, I feel like. And my nickname is Himang, so that's hope in English. And I've always felt burdened by this because I always thought there was some sort of an expectation for me to always excel. But after reading Pachinko, after reading about Sanja, Yangjin, Hansu, Isaac, rooting for Noah, Solomon, etc., I've learned that my nickname Hope is really like my family, like a child kind of watering a seed, hoping that it will bloom one day. And so I just want to thank you because this book really allowed me to understand that. And my question is, now that I understand love, how can I translate my thank you, my gratitude towards my family?
Well, thank you so much for coming, and thank you so much for what you just said. I'm amazed that you understand love. You sound like a very young person. But that's great. But in terms of translating your love and your gratitude for your family, I think that they already know. I think it's not what we say, it's what we do. I believe that very strongly. And our actions must demonstrate our feelings, our thoughts, our ideas. And I'm sure that if you feel this way, you have already demonstrated a sense of gratitude. On occasion, if you do want to say thank you, obviously, to your family, that's a good thing too. But I'm moved by your graciousness as such a young person to recognize that the people that you love are people to whom you are in debt. I feel a sense of debt all the time for all the love that I receive. And I think that I can pay them back or I could pay others back. So I want to thank you for the debt that I have for tonight. And I want to thank each and every one of you who waited online, who braved this very difficult rain. And I want to thank Jennifer for being my partner. So thanks all of you, and I'm so sorry that we couldn't address everything tonight, and please get home safely.
네, 정말 아쉽게도 시간 관계상 모든 분들의 질문에 답변 드리지 못한 점 죄송하고요. 많이 서 계셨는데 다리 너무 아프셨을 것 같아요. 죄송합니다. 자, 이렇게 해서 관객 여러분들께서 이제 작가님과 함께 Q&A 세션을 할 수 있었는데요. 모든 분들의 적극적인 참여 다시 한번 감사드립니다. 자, 이렇게 파친코 이민진 작가 북톡을 벌써 마무리할 시간이 됐습니다. 인사드리기 전에 일단 작가님께 혹시 마지막으로 하시고 싶으신 이야기가 있으신지 말씀을 부탁드릴게요. Is there something that you would like to add before we say goodbye to our audience today?
Well, in addition to being so grateful to all of you, I also am really grateful for the translators tonight. There's 2 tonight, and I know of Kyung-shil who's been whispering in my ear. And it's so important to me that we can be bilingual because I think we need more than 2 languages to tell each other how much we need each other. When I write down that we are a powerful family in the flyleaf of the book, I mean that. I believe that the world could change if we recognize that we are deeply interconnected, that we don't only care about our family, but that we are actually all a family. Dr. Martin Luther King called his concept of this world house, that we have a house from the world. And as members and residents of the World House, I want to thank you, I want to encourage you, and above all, I want to tell you, my family members, that I am always in your debt. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much for your time. 네. Would you like to make the announcement or shall I do it?
So I want to be in a selfie with you. So how do we do this?
네, 저희 인사드리기 전에 작가님께서 여러분들을 위해서 꼭 추억을 만들고 싶다. 셀피. 요즘은 아이돌 사이에서 아주 인기 있는 뭐 이렇게 사진 찍는 거 있잖아요. 그래서 단체 사진이라고 해도 될까요? 여러분들과 함께 사진 촬영을 하고 이제 인사드리는 건 어떨까 싶습니다. So, alright. 네, 여러분들 함께 사진에 들어갈 준비하시고요. 네, 예쁘게. So I think we're supposed to stand this way, right here at the center. Oh, careful. 네, 여기에서 하면 되죠? So you can stand there and then I'll stand here. A real selfie. 정말 셀피를 찍고, 네. Let me. You got the pen in your face. Smile, everyone. 1, 2, 3. Cheese. 네, 감사합니다. 그리고 예, we could pose for them. 네, 그리고 이번엔 제가 빠지도록 하겠습니다. For you and your audience. Okay, on a count of 3, everyone. Cheese. 1, 2, 3. Cheese. 네, 감사합니다. Thank you very much. 네, 고맙습니다. 아쉽지만 일정상 별도의 사인회가 준비되어 있지 않습니다. I do want to apologize for that. 안전에 유의하시고 조심히 돌아가시기 바랍니다. Thank you so much for being with us today, everyone. Have a wonderful evening. 안녕히 가세요.